All right. We're pleased to have with us our next guest for the day. From Kentuckians for Medical Marijuana, Eric Crawford, Michelle Crawford, and Jamie Montevallo.
This is why I am into this. Good morning. My name is Eric Crawford, and this is my wife, Michelle. Thanks for allowing me this opportunity to speak with you about an issue that is personal for me. I'm going to talk to you about the choice for me to use cannabis for my ailments. I'm here to speak about medical cannabis and immediate need. I am here to speak about medical cannabis and immediate need for the laws of Kentucky to change, to allow truly sick and disabled people to legally use medical marijuana as an option to treat their illness. I'm a lifelong resident of Mason County. In 1994, I was a passenger in a motor vehicle accident. I'm a lot older than you all. It was a dark night, and the car I was in hit a cow that was in the road. As a result of this accident, I am a quadriplegic. I am confined to this wheelchair and require 24-hour round-the-clock care. My life is a struggle of constant nerve pain, ungodly muscle spasm, extreme stiffness, arthritis, and chronic urinary tract infections. These are my narcotics. I'm prescribed to ease my pain. They make me feel crazy. My mind and body do not tolerate narcotics. I'm aware that I am very nerve-wracking when I have to resort to taking them. My favorite thing to do is sit and talk with my dad. Even my dad has a hard time dealing with me when I take pain pills. If I could legally use medical cannabis, I would not need any of these narcotics. I could use less of these other pills too. As being crippled isn't enough of an issue, I have many other medical conditions. I've been followed by Dr. Henry Kaplan and Dr. Johann Sotal at the University of Louisville, Kentucky Lions Eye Center for at least 15 years. I travel 175 miles one way 6 times a year to see these well-respected doctors. I have an autoimmune disease called optical uveitis. In layman terms, it's inflammation from my optic nerve to my brain. This disease could cause my vision to be very distorted. I am on very powerful immunosuppressants to try to slow the progression of this ailment. This disease may very well lead to blindness. As a result of my eye disease, I have uncontrollable glaucoma. Even the strongest doses of all prescription medications for my glaucoma, eye pressure isn't controlled. My doctors recommend I use marijuana as a way to lower my pressure in my eyes. It is a fact that marijuana, along with my prescription medications, control my glaucoma. My doctors told me if my glaucoma wasn't controlled, I'd be blind in a year. Medical cannabis calms my muscle spasms, relaxes my stiffness, eases my nerve pain, reduces the inflammation in my whole body, and lowers the pressure in my eyes. I don't want to be blind and don't deserve to be blind. Right. My mind, but does not make me out of my mind. Life in a wheelchair isn't easy. Life in a wheelchair is not easy. I am a sick person who needs medical cannabis for relief and a better quality of life. Medical cannabis is proven to treat many health issues. In a May 2000 Fox News poll, 85% of Americans believe that marijuana should be allowed for medical purposes if their doctor prescribes it. Almost 1/2 of Americans live in a state where patients can legally use cannabis with their doctor's advice. Since I made this speech, 3/4 of Americans live in a state where they can use marijuana. There needs to be common sense, compassionate reform of this law in Kentucky to help the truly sick, diseased, disabled citizens, truly sick and diseased and disabled citizens of the Bluegrass State. We have a moral duty to stand up for the rights of our afflicted family and friends. I have a moral duty to stand up for myself. I would ask that each one of you here stand up for me and my rights. I yourself in my shoes or the shoes of other genuinely ill people of Kentucky. At the age of 46, what would you do? Would you leave the only community you've ever lived in? Your elderly parents, your home you built just for your needs, your farmland you love, your friends that help you for pain relief in your eyesight? Would you leave? Would you stay in Kentucky and be viewed as a criminal? Would you break the law and risk losing your freedom and family and friends? Would you do nothing and suffer and go blind? I should not choose any of these, nor anybody else. Please help me. Thank you for your time, and most importantly, your support. I am counting on it. This is the ethical, compassionate, and right only thing to do. In 29 states in the District of Columbia and Puerto Rico, with these, I have 8 doctors' recommendations. In 29 states, the District of Columbia and Puerto Rico, I could legally use medical cannabis. Since the first time I gave this speech, I am no longer on dangerous autoimmune drugs that were making me sick. My eyes are doing fine, and I haven't taken an opiate in almost 4 years. In 2014, the mayor of Maysville told me to go do this as advice. I was able to get a resolution. In 2016, Maysville, the city of Maysville gave me a resolution in favor of medical cannabis and sent it to Franklin. Since then, there's been other counties and cities that have done it. We all need your help. Thank you. My wife's going to say a few words. I met Jaime in 2014. We got a bill passed out of the Health and Welfare Committee that year, and they got sent to die. And Jaime's the president of Kentucky's for Medicinal Marijuana, and he'll speak in a little while too. Thank you.
I'm Eric's wife. We have a nonprofit organization, Kentuckians for Medicinal Marijuana. We have about 20,000 followers on Facebook. We're older than you all even, but we are trying to do Twitter now, and we are going to get on the Instagram thing. See if we can work on that. We have lots of support in Kentucky from all places, young, old, Democrats, Republicans. We have been an organization for about 5 years. We have like a monthly meeting in Lexington where supporters from all over can come and join us, or we usually Facebook Live that for people on Facebook again. But you can check out our website, KY4MM.org, or follow us on Facebook. I just want to talk about, I am a Democrat woman, and I'm proud. Democrats have always been very supportive of our medical cannabis fight in Kentucky. I would like to just recognize a few. John Sims is our representative from Mason County, Fleming County, Gratiot County. He sponsored our bill. He was a huge fighter and champion for our cause. My husband and Jaime worked on the gold standard medical bill in the country. And John Sims filed it for us, and he learned it, and he studied about medical cannabis, and he fought for us in Frankfort, and I am so thankful that he is our representative and that he is not afraid to speak on a subject that he didn't really know about before he became an elected official. How that kind of worked, I'll kind of be quick. When I found out in the paper that he was going to be running for office, I went to his Dairy Queen unannounced, and I asked could he talk with me, and he sat down, and we spent about an hour. And I said, if you're going to run, I need to know if you're going to fight for me, and if you're not, then I'm going to find someone to run that will fight for me. He was very receptive and compassionate and caring. So John Sims is my favorite Democrat at this time in the House. Also, huge shout out to Secretary of State Allison Grimes. Matt Daly, I'm not sure if you all know him. He also works in that office and has been very instrumental this past year in helping us get media and attention and support from places where, you know, just our little volunteer group of people may not be able to get it from. So huge shout out to Allison for the attention she brought to House Bill 166. It's really, I've got to talk about Al Gentry, Mackenzie Cantwell, Angie Hatton, George Brown, Derek Graham, Rick Rand, Mary Lou Marzian, Susan Westrom, Kelly Flood, Attica Scott, love that her daughter was here, Jeff Greer, Jeff Donahue, Dean Schmore, Chris Harris, Rick Nelson, Joni Jenkins, Tom Birch, even Daryl Owens, who I'm not sure if you all know, he's quite ill. They are co-sponsors of our bill. I mean, that's a lot of co-sponsors for a controversial topic. So we were so proud that we got those and that Representative Sims fought to secure these co-sponsors. Daryl Owens, as a caregiver to my husband, his wife brought him to session every day in his wheelchair, and she's an elderly lady. And she brought him every day to session, and she pushed him where he needed to go, and then packed his wheelchair up at night and drove him home. And Daryl Owens is going to be, this is his last year, and that's a loss for the Democratic Party because he cared so much about our sick and disabled that, you know, that he drug himself to Frankfurt many days this session to fight for medical cannabis. So we're greatly indebted to him. We also have to speak on our senators. We did have a companion bill filed in the Senate by a Republican sponsor, so it was a bipartisan issue. I want to do a big shout out to Gerald Neal, Senator Denise Harper Angel, Senator McGarvey, Reginald Thomas. I hope you all love him as much as we love him. He's a great guy and champion for those who are less fortunate or disabled or disadvantaged in our state. And he is a huge asset, which I'm going to hate to lose him in our state government. Also, I want to speak on Perry Clark. I don't know if any of you all know Senator Clark. He is our original sponsor of medical cannabis in Kentucky. He has mentored us and taught us how the legislative process works and encouraged us to move ourselves forward and continue this fight in different ways. I also want to shout out to the LRC staff who have taught us and shared information and helped us a lot, and also the bill writers who helped us to develop the gold standard medical bill in the state. It is refreshing to have young people, you guys here. We've got to work on, you know, getting our house back in order so that we can pass a bill this coming session. We were hopeful for the past. We are always hopeful. We've been fighting this about 5 years, and we will continue to fight for this. I'd like to introduce the Executive Director of Kentuckians for Medicinal Marijuana. His name is Jaime Montalvo, and he'll let you know what we're planning on doing for our future.
Thank you so much for having us here before you. This is quite an honor, and it's a first that this subject has finally got so much attention. Like Michelle said, we've been working on this for quite a few years now. The organization originally started, in 2014, shortly after I was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis and found that cannabis was effective in the treatment of my condition. And I used it to get off of multiple opiates, muscle relaxants and stuff, just like Eric stated. In my case, though, I live in Louisville, Jefferson County, and there was a gentleman that robbed a bank, ran down my street. Behind him come cops with dogs. Sidebar, they smelled my home. I was arrested that night with son in hand. Unfortunately, or fortunately, my son was not able to see me in handcuffs, but it was quite difficult for me that custody was taken for about 6 months. I had to go through rehab, had to go through the process in order to get custody back, and I had been a single father since he was 3 years old at the time when this happened. He was 9, so that, it's all he knew. And it was very disturbing, for not just for me, but for him. And, the type of distress that causes a child. And that has been my motivating factor in all of this. I've met dozens of families that it's happened to across the state. And I think that's something that we're going to try to expose and run on a little bit more this session during the summer. It's not something I think is known to a lot of the legislators in Frankfurt that this is quite happening. Personally, in my particular case, the issue was not possession, it was not cultivation. Quite frankly, and by law, I could have been selling and it would have been okay, but the actual act of testing positive automatically calls you a neglectful parent and is grounds to take away custody of children. So CPS and the state understood that I was using this medicinally, and they understood all of that, but it's still illegal and they have to do something. So in my case, they slapped my wrist for criminal sanctions, but I had to work quite hard to get my son back. And what's frustrating for me is that it costs twice as much to get your children back as it does to keep you out of jail. So how many families or how many parents don't have that opportunity? Personally, I was fortunate enough to have a family that helped me with throughout this really hard time. And I think a lot of Kentuckians don't fall into that. And so they may lose their children for quite a lot longer. So we started this organization, and in 2014 we had our first comprehensive bill. It was filed by Senator Perry Clark, which Michelle mentioned, and he was our fighter when we first started. Of course, he's a strong Democrat, has been fighting for us since then. And at that time, we had our bill passed out of committee. We had a companion bill at that time filed by Mary Lou Marzian, also another Democrat in the House. And that bill was passed out of the Health and Welfare in 2014, at a time when the House was Democratic. And unfortunately, after being passed, it was recommitted to the judiciary, and we never heard of it again. And it has been quite a few years that we've been fighting through the interim, through the session. We've had various bills filed, but they've never been heard since that time in 2014 until this session. This session, we had 2 bills filed, Senate Bill 118 and House Bill 166. Only 166 had movement this session, and it was heard 3 separate times in the House Judiciary Committee, which by what we've been told is one of the toughest committees in the legislature in Frankfurt. And I think it was, for us, it was really a win just to be heard, let alone be heard 3 separate times. Now, unfortunately, there was quite a bit of negative discussion being heard in Frankfurt at that time. But I think even the legislators understand that the opposition really doesn't have much ground to stand on in this subject. And when we testified that third day, we, throughout all of this, we were not politicians. We weren't, we didn't graduate from college with political science degrees. I was, I focused in medicine. I wanted to be a physician like my father. I had no aspirations to be in politics until all of this happened, and I hit the ground running. And I'm glad to see young people becoming involved in politics here, because this is what it's going to take. If you're not active, the laws are being changed in ways that may not benefit us. To me, it's quite, I'm an animal lover, but I find it quite disturbing that you can get in more trouble for, mistreating your animal than you can your child. It's quite disturbing the way the laws are. But So in this subject, it's or any subject, it takes people to get involved. So get registered, and we've been pushing people getting registered to vote and actually getting active in government. So like Michelle stated, or Eric stated, we developed the gold standard bill in Frankfurt. We worked on it for quite a few years. We did a lot of town halls across the state. We traveled back and forth from the Purchase area in western Kentucky all the way to eastern Kentucky. And throughout these times, we spoke to the community. We learned about their issues with the subject, what they were afraid of, and we tried to develop a bill that would prevent our children from getting their hands on it. Have tight controls to where the state would have oversight, to where there is no question about who has and who doesn't. Because that's what they fear in Frankfurt. They fear that it's going to be a free-for-all, that people are going to be partying on the street, that we're going to have a lot of billboards with pot signs, and people partying. That's the vision they see. And when I testified the first time here in Frankfurt this year, I explained what House Bill 166 was not. It's not a recreational bill. It's not about people, getting high and having a party. This is about tight regulations that would bring protections to a patient, so that they wouldn't be arrested, sent to jail, lose their children, have their homes taken away from them, or have their assets seized. So what we asked for in the bill was what we would expect would be common sense. It would provide state oversight. It would give patients liberty or the freedom to try cannabis instead of different pharmaceuticals. It would create a regulatory department in Frankfurt, somewhat similar to alcohol or boxing it's a professional licensing department. They would be taxed with public safety, administrative regulations, and licensing for patients or for business. Now, if Frankfurt passed the law, it wouldn't legalize the sale in your local area automatically. It would allow the possession for a patient or the consumption for that patient. But your local city government would have to vote in the licensing, the sales in your local area. So say right here in Covington, if Frankfurt passed a law this year, Covington would come next year after the licensing process had gone through. They would say, well, we're going to vote on bringing the licensing here, sales, cultivation, distribution, right here in Covington. And if they vote yes, well, then they tell Frankfurt, we're open to having licenses right here in Covington. We want to have 2 different dispensaries here in downtown. This is where we want them. And what that local area is actually voting to bring in is jobs, licensing. Those jobs are actually quite high paying. Somebody who trims cannabis plants gets paid $12 to $13 an hour. Somebody who grows a cannabis plant is getting paid anywhere from $90,000 to $150,000 a year for a manager of the store. Somebody who actually manages the dispensary is getting paid $90,000 a year. These are high-paying jobs, and then with them come electrician jobs, plumber jobs, CPA. It's a real industry that you're bringing, and this is all licensed through the state. So the state has ultimate control of who works and who doesn't. People pay to have that license to the state, so then it brings in revenue for the state. Now, in order for a patient to qualify, they would have to have first a qualifying condition. They would have to have a qualifying physician. That physician would have to fill out a state-approved form saying that this patient suffers from this condition that's approved, and they sign it. That patient takes that document to the State Department and gets it approved through the state. The state has, again, ultimate control of who gets approved and who does not get approved. If they get that approval, they get a license. That license has a number, just like your driver's license number. So if he gets pulled over by a police officer, he says, well, I have my card right here. Here's my number. That police officer looks at the card, sees the number. He calls the 800 number or goes online and says, well, that patient is accepted. He's approved. He's active. He's good to go. Now, this person over here gets stopped. They have possession of marijuana. They don't have a card. They're still breaking the law. So they can still be prosecuted. Again, it's not free for all. It's not for everyone. It is a tightly regulated program. Now, we have common sense rules and regulations, like no public smoking. We ran into a big issue with, with supporters in, oh, well, then you're not going to allow smoking. That's not very much liberty. It's not very liberty-like. But in reality, in no state that's legalized cannabis, even fully, can you smoke out in the street publicly. It's just point blank, it's not allowed. Now, you can still purchase a flower. What you do with that flower, you do on your own. You just can't use it publicly. And that's something not just for legislators, but for the common public. They don't want to see people consuming it on the street. Something like drinking alcohol on the street. It may be a nuisance to some, and they don't want to see that. So there's no advertising, so there's no billboards, there's no TV advertising, there's no radio advertising in the marijuana industry. Again, we don't want to commercialize it for our children. With DUIs and DWIs, because we are afraid of people driving under the influence of not just marijuana, but opiates or any other drug, alcohol, what we did in our bill was part of the licensing and the taxing goes back to those local communities that vote to have the industry in, and those fees go towards hiring of new drug recognition experts. So it's new police officer jobs in your local community, which are driving the street trying to find people who are driving impaired. And now what are those people driving impaired under? They may be drunk, they may be under meth, they may be under cocaine, whatever, even marijuana. But they're under the influence of something, so those police officers, they'll see somebody swerving, they stop them, they do a field sobriety test. In that field sobriety test, that's where you walk the straight line, you hold your leg, you do the alphabet. Those are experts, and those are being funded by the licenses and by the fees in this program. So again, those police officer jobs. There's a program like Casper, so we keep up with everybody that's in the program. So we don't have another pill mill-like epidemic. We tried to make regulations so where a physician can't recommend a dispensary and a dispensary can't recommend a physician. So again, we curb the pill mill-like epidemic before it starts. Anything that a patient buys for oral consumption has to be in an opaque bottle, so you can't see what's inside of here. It has to be a child-proof container. So if it's plastic, it has to be real thick. If it's a container, it has to be child-proof. You have to push down just like your pill bottles. When you purchase that product, it has to come in a secondary package that's opaque, so the general public can't see it. So again, we're trying to protect the public as much as possible and trying to curb our children from seeing it. That's about all we have here. I mean, we broke down the whole bill into one page, so it's very simple to read and understand. If you guys need this, I'm happy to provide it. We have pros and cons if you guys are interested, but I'm willing to take questions, or we're willing to take questions.
There was two other things. 60% of the ownership has to be from Kentucky.
And also on the bottles we're labeling, it has THC on it.
Right.
THC.
So any product being sold at these dispensaries has to first have a stamp that's state approved saying that that product contains cannabis. Those products can't look like something that our child would recognize, like a gummy bear or a gummy worm. What else? They have to be no more than 10 milligrams apiece. And there is an independent safety facility which checks for quality. So they make sure that those products don't have heavy metals, herbicides, pesticides. It's really, it's making it a valid industry. It's a real industry here in Kentucky instead of the black market, which is what we have right now, because obviously people are consuming it, people are obviously being arrested for it, people are obviously selling it out there. We actually arrest about 16,000 people a year for it here in Kentucky every single year, just for simple possession. Now, each county prosecutes it differently. In Jefferson County or Fayette County, you may get a slap on the wrist, you may get a fine, a $50 ticket. But if you get stopped in Hardin or Meade or certain counties, you'll end up going to jail over the weekend for a tiny little 1 gram joint. So it's applied very differently across the state. But if anybody has any questions, I'm willing to answer. Yes, ma'am.
as you guys have been presenting this, what do you find is the best tactic towards bringing this forth to a more rural community that might have more conservative values and be resistant?
Well, it's really just showing the public that we're here. We've been in Benton, Kentucky. We've been in Paintsville. We've been in Pikeville. We've been across the state in very conservative areas. And once you tell the public that we're going to be here, in Benton, Kentucky, we had 100+ people in a tiny little library. In Pikeville, we had over 100 people in a little hotel room. Paintsville, yeah, we had a gymnasium full of people from all walks of life, old to young.
In Lexington, we'll get 30, 40 people.
Yeah, let's get to
In
it.
rural towns, we'll get almost 100. In Lexington, we'll get 30, 40 people. So, the conservative areas aren't as bad as the cities, really, as far as people coming out wanting to be involved.
Maybe it's because in the small areas it's more face-to-face and certain people know that we're coming and they actually interact with their community a little bit more than Facebook. We'll have events on Facebook and they'll say, 700 people have thumbed it up and said they're coming. And that'll be in Louisville or Lexington, but we get 100 people in that crowd. But you go into, Paintsville, just 40 said they were coming to this little event, but we filled the gymnasium, And it's also maybe the community organizers, and how well they are selling it. Like Michelle said, we are now, this is going to be the first month that we're going to make our monthly meeting. We've been working, officially we became an organization in 2014. And we found people over time, they want to support and they want to do stuff, but it's been really hard to actually get people to physically do it, volunteers. We volunteer ourselves, our services across the state. We drive, this is our own gas money, and it's hard. But, we're disabled, we don't have anything else to do. This is our job. And now we're going to have these monthly meetings in Lexington. We found a place, as long as we get approved later this week, we'll have them in Lexington and people will come to us and maybe we can find some community organizers, people with specific specialties, marketing or whatever it is. And I think this summer we're really going to show Frankfurt what it's about. People really get active, like we're hoping the Democratic Party does this summer.
We really need to start good at Snapchat.
Yes, sir.
I feel like there is a stereotype, especially in California, that people trying to get a card are using like sleepiness or like those sort of issues that aren't like MS or stuff like that.
It's loose, it's recreational.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
When you spoke about like that they had to have a medical condition, is that a state board decision or is that up to the doctor?
Well, there's been a lot of discussion the last few years on what conditions we accepted. Now, what you were mentioning in California, you're absolutely correct. You could get it for a sore back, you could get it from a stubbed toe, maybe even PMS. But we knew that there was no deaths from that time. Now, we also knew that it was badly regulated. They didn't have anybody to look to in 1996 when they regulated in California. We put them all into disorders. So say a movement disorder. That's something, that can include dementia, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, a bunch of different disorders. Even some of them include ADHD type conditions. So say a hyperactive person, instead of taking an Adderall, they can maybe use cannabis. If they find a doctor that's been approved through the state that's willing to give them that recommendation, those doctors have to be approved through the state.
We're not as loose as California. We have to be, if we want to help as many people get help pills.
So is it put in through the legislation?
Certain conditions, yes, automatically get put in through the legislation, but then any citizen has the power or the ability to bring it to the committee to try to add conditions. And if for some reason that committee doesn't add them, they can try through court to put it in. That's what's happened in Illinois. In Illinois, they didn't have PTSD, they didn't have chronic pain, they didn't have various conditions, and they've brought it to the committee and then eventually to the court. And in the court, they've ruled, we're going to add PTSD, we're going to add chronic pain. And it's taken them years to do that, but, there is a process for it. Yes, sir?
I work for a city council member in Lexington, so I was there when we all made your presentation, and ultimately the council voted in favor of legalizing this in Frankfurt. But behind the scenes, I know a lot of the city council members there they don't think that passing those kind of resolutions has an impact on Frankfurt. They see it as political theater, so there was some hesitancy, I know, there. But we've also found success in other counties and cities across the state. So do you think that, and I'm guessing there's a certain threshold where maybe it could be effective or not, but do you find that local municipalities and counties passing resolutions in favor of this is helpful? And if so, do you think that's a viable strategy? Because, legislators in Frankfurt, they have a lot of pressure coming from higher, the governor, outside groups, and other special interest constituencies, whereas your county commissioners and city council members don't have that pressure and can loosen it up for state legislators.
Well, your question is, until this year, there was only one resolution, and that was Mason County and Maysville. So it's yet to be seen. And my resolution really did help. It impressed people. Whenever I mentioned it, they didn't have much to say to me. What was they going to say with my community standing behind me and my doctor standing behind me? So it's yet to be seen. We'll have to see.
Really, that's what the resolution is stating, is that the community, the county, the city support the patient's right to use it. I think that it does send a message to that particular legislator to know, hey, the city, the fiscal court supports medical cannabis. I need to support medical cannabis because they've spoken.
Well, and Maysville reaffirmed their resolution this year again, so it was helpful. I'll tell you what, this year there's been quite a few legislators that have mentioned, I've been seeing these resolutions coming in, so I think it is making an impact. We wondered at first if it was a political theater that we're really getting into. Is it just a show? Is it going to be hurtful for people's political campaigns? But if we're going to make this into a political issue, we need to start asking those tough questions while they're running for office. And if we want to make change, then we need to know those answers while they're running again for office.
And I think some city officials use that as an excuse to not to have to do an action, so that their people, they pass that on to our legislators.
They didn't want to take the vote, so they would accuse others of, making political theater. But, Fayette County, too, being one of the more liberal spots in the state, they don't feel that, Lexington and Louisville passed it, Frankfurt ignores it. But I didn't know if that was what your perception was from seeing the results.
It's been I think it's been helpful. Now, Danville area, there is 3 different cities in that area that passed supportive measures, but we still couldn't meet with their representative. So it's very simple.
I think these resolutions lend a lot of legitimacy to a cause that people on the other side like to paint as illegitimate, like, you just want to get high. But when you see other elected officials, other people who are in leadership saying, no, we're not afraid to take a stand, that helps the people in Frankfurt, even if they're not really doing anything at the local level. Even just them saying, no, we're willing to stand behind this. These people aren't just, hippies who want to, be high all day.
Yeah.
And I would mention that Buffalo Trace Young Democrats is proud to introduce a resolution recognizing the work that you guys have done and calling on our state legislature to pass a medical marijuana bill. Again, as Mason County, we know how much work you guys have been doing and we want to support you. And I'm going to segue that into a question, because I think the thing that you guys could do with these resolutions is show just how strong that allyship is and how that partnership is. Could you talk a little bit about how you reached out to other groups, to allies, and how you built this coalition? Because I imagine it's not the same group of people you started with years ago.
No, it's taken quite a while to get to this point. I mean, I think this interim is really going to be a different point for us. We're opening up a different chapter this summer. The last few years, it's been a close-knit group of cannabis supporters that have been fighting for reform for the last 20 years. People that really supported cannabis, and they've been active for a long time. Now, there's people from different walks of life that are getting involved. The medical community, the political arena, the teachers are getting involved. We've actually even been working the FOP. So I mean, they may get, this summer we may actually get a lot of support from groups of people that have nothing to do with cannabis. Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
I work with Medicaid waivers, so I was just wondering, do you see any financial lot of people who are considered disabled are on those waivers due to the high cost of medical bills.
Well, this isn't something that's normally covered by insurance, but I'll tell you this, there's been a few groundbreaking cases where workman's comp has covered cannabis, and there's actually people or patients who have FHA accounts or FSA accounts where they put the money in the savings and they spend those savings on cannabis. And they're actually covering it now in some of the medical cannabis states. So it's groundbreaking. There's no sort of laws or rules saying that they're supposed to cover it. And I don't foresee them covering it anytime soon by measure. But, you know, it's emerging. Now, there's a patient that we follow from northern Kentucky. Her and her family moved to Missouri. And this little girl is on Minnesota, I'm sorry. She's on an oil. And her medication costs about $2,500 a month out of pocket. Her family's well off, and they're able to afford that. But the doctor's saying that to be therapeutic, because she's right now subtherapeutic, it would be upwards of $5,000 a month, which, you know, it's out of range for especially, like you said, Medicare patients. Which what we assume is, or what we're looking at, most of the patients that are going to qualify for medical marijuana are going to be disabled. They're going to be on disability, and they're not going to have that money. Yeah. Yes, sir.
Yes, I was just wondering, how do you handle opposition, and do you follow up with those people that do oppose you in your beliefs and in the incorporation of this? And in what ways do you follow up with them? I guess is the question.
Well, we just oppose them with the facts. And no, unless we change their mind, we try not to follow up with them. We just see them in the paper where they're going to be and say, well, we'll show up there or we'll avoid them. But the opposition, you can beat them with the facts. Because they make up things, usually.
Well, apparently I like to send emails. I was restoring my computer the other day, and I had 99,000 something emails. So I like to send a lot of emails, apparently. But to touch on what you were saying, we have met very little opposition across the state. When you bring a sick person like, you know, one of us, or I don't look very sick, but Eric obviously does. And it's perception, really. But in, like, say, Town Hall, I can remember one instance in western Kentucky outside of Owensboro where there was an opponent. He was a churchgoer walking down the streets. He's seen our sign holding, and he was, you know, in uproar. And one of our gentlemen takes him aside, and they're going back and forth. And by the time they were actually talking common sense and regulation, and, you know, it's my choice, I don't drink alcohol, you know, why can't I choose this, blah, blah, blah. The guy was actually calmed down, and you could see his demeanor completely changed. Now, in Frankfort, you know, where the opposition really matters, we really don't meet much opposition. We close those doors, and 90-something% of the legislators all agree something has to happen, something's going to happen, something, you know, it's quite frankly needs to happen. We can't continue doing this, but they don't agree on who's sick enough, who is not sick enough, how to consume it, you know, how to bring it about. That's where the issue lies. And that's why, you know, we're trying to bring this, you know, common sense approach, just regulate it just like any other industry. You know, if you make it tight at first, it's easy to reel it out. Then, you know, throwing it out there and trying to reel it back in. We've had legislators actually tell us that they'd rather make harder on alcohol than it is marijuana. But we've also had a legislator tell us that when we told him, well, don't you think prohibition is counteractive? He says, well, right now we have it tightly regulated. I said, what do you mean regulated? There's no regulation on marijuana, it's just prohibited. He said, exactly. It's so tightly regulated that it's prohibited. But is it doing a good job at keeping it away from our children? No. Our children here in Kentucky say it's easier to get marijuana than it is to get alcohol or cigarettes. And why is that? Because there's no regulation, there's no oversight. If you give that person selling that product a license that they paid $50,000 to $100,000 for, they're going to want to protect their investment. And they're not going to be selling to a kid, just like when they're selling alcohol. They're not going to be selling to a kid because they're going to lose that alcohol license. Anybody else have a question? Yes, sir.
I was actually going to ask you that. If a doctor feels it necessary to prescribe to a child, I think of, you see the videos of children having seizures and the oil, alleviates that. Would they be allowed to?
Yes, and in our bill, it covers pediatrics. They have to have a physician that is willing to give them that recommendation. They also have to have a guardian that's willing to take them there and sign it off.
And
that
be
guardian
responsible.
has to have ultimate control of that product at home. They have to be the one that dispenses that product. We didn't make a special stipulation where they had to have 2 physicians for each pediatric patient. In some states they do that. But it's very hard to even find that first doctor to recommend cannabis for a pediatric patient. That's a taboo within a taboo subject. It's pretty hard to do. And we've actually followed quite a few pediatric patients across the states that have moved. And it's, I enjoy
We had a
doing
certain
that.
legislator that looked at us and said, what would a child need cannabis for? And I said, seizures. And they said, well, that's what we passed the CBD bill for. And CBD is good, but it doesn't help everyone. That's what I told him.
Well, and to touch on what Eric said there, we do have a CBD bill that was passed in 2014. And that CBD bill works also now, and the original CBD bill didn't actually work. It's Senate Bill 124 from 2014. As written, it didn't function. But the way patients are using CBD oil here in Kentucky today is through the hemp bill. And the thing is, through that program, there's no oversight. So patients or citizens are consuming these products without really being tested. What are they consuming? Are they consuming heavy metals, herbicides, pesticides, contaminants, molds? Now, there are some very legitimate companies that are actually doing their independent testing and making sure that their farmers are growing organically or whatever. But we know that because there are no oversights from the state, there are farmers out there that are not doing that and are selling these products to patients. And if they are immunocompromised, it can actually cause harm.
As far as the Justice Department is concerned, Kentucky is a medical marijuana state just like Colorado. Because if you're not making it for fiber or seed, you're making it for medicine. CBD is just like THC. It is illegal federally. We are a medical marijuana state.
Anybody else? Yes, sir.
Do you think legislatively that the differentiation between the term marijuana and cannabis is very important? Like when you're talking with constituents or when talking with legislators?
Ultimately, it is. Well, first, federally, the initial lawsuit failed because in the lawsuit they named it marijuana instead of cannabis. Now the difference in the term marijuana or hemp and cannabis is really just terminology at the federal level. Anything under 0.3% THC is considered hemp. Anything over 0.3% THC is marijuana or cannabis. It's all the same plant, it's just technicality. So, but what we're growing here is technically hemp, but the way we're growing it for CBD processing is all female plants of certain varieties. So basically they're growing medical marijuana. And there's really no oversight. There's, if you went to Colorado or Michigan, in order to get, the Harlequin strain, which is one of the strains we're growing here under hemp, you have to have a medical marijuana license. You'd have to go to Colorado, you'd have to see a doctor, you'd have to, get that license, get it approved, go to a dispensary, go buy that product. Here, you can buy it off the shelf at the 7-Eleven. Now, I'm not complaining about that because I think it has to have less regulation, But what I am concerned about is that there's no oversight in quality. That concerns me. And especially, there's also now a federal hemp bill that has been introduced by Senator McConnell. Now the issue, again, I'm not against hemp. I love hemp, and if it was used for fibers and industrial purposes the way it was intended, it would be great. But the term that has come about since the federal farming bill has been medicalized hemp. And that in itself is an oxymoron because hemp is industrial. It's not medicinal. Now, you're growing medicinal varieties of cannabis under the hemp definition. That's fine. But it's not the same. So what we're going to have and what we have now are patients who are testing, or citizens who are testing positive, not for hemp, not for CBD, but they're testing positive for marijuana. And they're running into, again, custody issues, medications being taken away. Right, by taking legal CBD products, they're testing positive for marijuana. And again, they're running into custody issues, having medications taken away, jobs are being lost. You know, it's a big issue, and it's not really being thought of because you're using a legal product. Anybody else? I really appreciate the productive questions. It was an honor to be here.
Thank you all
Thank
so
you.
much.
I have one more thing I would like to say. I'm hoping that the Kentucky Young Democrats would collectively send a resolution to the General Assembly supporting medical cannabis, and maybe you guys can put that on your agenda to help us.
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Tommy from Kentuckians for Medicinal Marijuana. We really appreciate everyone.